In the old photos, one paycheck bought a house, a car, and breathing room. Today, money families work twice as hard and still feel one bill away. So, what happened between then and now? And why did it change so quietly? This isn't nostalgia, and it isn't blame. It's a ledger of real forces. We'll follow wages, prices, and power, and watch how the bargains slowly unraveled. Because a single income once covered more than money. It covered stability and time. When that stability shrank, everything else had to stretch, including marriages and childhoods. We'll ask how a worker's pay once kept pace and why it stopped. We'll look at policies, boardrooms, shop floors, and kitchen tables, all in one frame. By the end, you'll see the turning points and what they cost in daily life. Starting the late 1940s, when America's factories were intact and the world rebuilt. A high school diploma could open a union job with a raise you could plan around. Many households lived on one wage, not because life was easy, but because math worked. Wartime controls had ended, but memories of scarcity kept spending careful and savings common. Employers wanted peace on the line, and unions had leverage after years of organizing. Contracts tied pay to productivity, and benefits like pensions and health coverage became standard. Government pushed homeownership with loans, highways, and zoning that favored new neighborhoods outside cities. The GI Bill helped many veterans attend college or buy homes at manageable monthly payments. In those years, rent, tuition, and medical bills took smaller bites of a paycheck. A second income was often optional, more about comfort than survival, in countless communities. A company man was promised a ladder, and the company expected loyalty in return. Small towns revolved around mills and plants, and big cities pulsed with industry and docks. Those jobs were not gentle, yet they offered a predictable rhythm for family budgets. A mortgage might be 3 times a yearly salary, not 6, 8, or 10. One car could serve, one phone line could serve, and many purchases waited until payday. There were exclusions too, and whole groups were denied the same deal by design. But for those who had access, the post-war bargain linked work, dignity, and upward motion. It mattered because it shaped expectations, teaching millions that effort would be met halfway. It also shaped politics, because stable wages made stable neighborhoods, and stable neighborhoods voted. That is the starting line for our question, and the clock begins to move. By the late 1960s, costs started rising faster, and the old formulas faced strain. America no longer stood alone in manufacturing, as Europe and Japan returned to full speed. Competition arrived in steel, cars, and electronics, and management searched for cheaper routes. At the same time, inflation bit into paychecks, and workers demanded raises just to hold steady. Then came the oil shocks of the 1970s, with lines at stations and higher everything. Companies raised prices but also began to see labor as a cost to cut, not a partner. New thinking spread in boardrooms, saying the corporation's first duty was maximizing shareholder returns. That shift changed negotiations, because wages became a target and benefits became negotiable again. Union membership began falling, pushed by law, by strategy, and by the changing economy. When unions weakened, individual workers bargained alone, and the bargaining table tilted sharply. Technology improved output, letting fewer people make more, but the gains didn't always reach pay. Factories moved to the suburbs, then to the south, then across oceans, chasing lower labor. Communities built around one plant discovered how fragile one employer could be suddenly. Meanwhile, more women entered paid work, expanding opportunity, but also becoming part of household math. Childcare, commuting, and second cars became new expenses that didn't exist in earlier budgets. Credit cards spread, offering convenience but also smoothing over shortfalls with long-term interest. Taxes and regulations shifted over decades, often rewarding capital more than wages, especially at the top. In 1980 and after, the federal government fought inflation, raising interest rates and slowing growth. Higher rates made homes harder to buy for a while, even as paychecks struggled to keep up. Then, as inflation cooled, a new problem appeared. Housing prices began outpacing local incomes. In many places, zoning limited new building, turning scarcity into a permanent feature. Healthcare changed, too, with advanced treatments, higher costs, and insurance that grew more complex. College, once affordable for many, rose in price as states cut support and demand surged. So the same family that could once save now borrowed, just to maintain their footing. Employers replaced pensions with 401k, shifting risk from the company to the individual worker. They also leaned on part-time and contract work, keeping schedules flexible and benefits thin. For a while, two incomes could compensate, and many families did not notice the trade. But the trade was time, and time is the first currency that runs out. By the 1990s, productivity kept climbing, yet median wages grew slowly, with bigger gaps. That is how the engine changed, and the road ahead demanded more than one paycheck. The winners were often those who owned assets, because assets rose when wages lagged. A house became both shelter and investment, and that dual role pushed prices higher. Renters felt it first, watching more of each check disappear before groceries or gas. Families added work hours, then added a second job, then added debt when hours failed. The calendar became a battlefield of shifts, school pickups, doctor visits, and delayed dinners. Parents outsourced what grandparents once provided and paid for it with money and guilt. As commuting grew, people spent more life in traffic and less life in neighborhoods. The promise of leisure shrank, even as televisions grew larger and phones grew smarter. In many homes, stress showed up as exhaustion, short tempers, and quiet worry at night. Healthcare bills became frightening because one accident could erase years of careful saving. To keep insurance, workers stayed in jobs they hated, a trap later called job lock. That abundance hid a truth. Lower prices sometimes depended on lower wages somewhere else. Communities that lost factories lost tax bases, and schools and roads aged without repair. Young adults delayed marriage, children, and home buying because the entry fee kept rising. Retirement moved from a finish line to a gamble, tied to markets and timing. Some households gained new freedoms as women built careers, yet many also carried double burdens. The workday followed people home, first through pagers, then email, then the glowing phone. Paychecks began to feel like water in a bucket with more holes each year. And the hardest part was invisible because families blamed themselves for a math problem. They clipped coupons, skipped vacations, and learned to stretch meals while headlines praised growth. When prosperity returned in some years, it often arrived unevenly, landing first in certain zip codes. So the country looked richer, yet many felt poor, because security had been traded away. A one-paycheck life became rare, not because values changed, but because the prices did. And once the second paycheck became necessary, employers quietly adjusted offers downward accordingly. This shift changed culture, because time-starved families wanted convenience, and convenience became a booming business. Fast food expanded, big box stores expanded, and two-day shipping later felt like a necessity. Politics absorbed the anxiety, with candidates promising relief while donors shaped the fine print. Trust in institutions weakened as people watched corporations merge, layoffs spread, and pensions vanish. Religious groups, civic clubs, and unions lost members because the biggest way to cut off the subtle city and showman is to compare the great cuts of who's A. The economy grew more financial, with profits increasingly coming from money itself, not making things. Household debt climbed, and interest payments became a quiet tax collected by banks. Media celebrated hustle, turning survival tactics into personal virtue and discouraging harder questions. Yet communities also adapted, creating new careers and services, healthcare, and technology, with mixed results. The story wasn't one collapse, but a long pivot, and pivots can feel like betrayal. If one paycheck once felt enough, it was because costs were restrained and bargaining was shared. When bargaining fractured and costs exploded, families filled the gap with more work and more debt. None of this was inevitable, and none of it was just one policy or one decade. The old photos weren't a fairy tale, but they captured a real balance that shifted. The question remains, and it's practical, not poetic. How do we make work buy security again? To answer, we have to separate wages from lifestyles and look at the price ladder. Housing sits on the top rung because land is limited and rules decide what gets built. When a town blocks apartments, it quietly requires longer drives, higher rents, and later starts. Healthcare is another rung, where miracles cost money and billing systems often hide the totals. Education is a rung, too, because the modern economy asks for credentials and charges for them. Then there's childcare, which is really labor, priced like labor and paid from wages. Add transportation, and you see how a car became a requirement, not a luxury. As those rungs rose, even steady pay could not keep a family from slipping. Some employers responded with perks, but perks cannot replace base pay and predictable scheduling. Others offered gig work, which promises freedom, yet often delivers uncertainty on the slow weeks. On paper, households earned more, but they also bought more necessities that were once subsidized. A paycheck can rise while feeling smaller if the essentials rise faster and never come down. This helps explain why older generations remember opportunity and younger generations remember squeeze. They are describing different price worlds, even when they live on the same street. The change also rearranged gender roles because necessity pulls everyone into the labor market. That brought independence for many, but it also left families improvising care with patchwork solutions. It changed childhood, too, as after-school hours moved from sidewalks to supervised programs. It changed marriage because partnership became a second job, with logistics replacing quiet time. It changed health because stress accumulates slowly and sleep is usually the first sacrifice. When you hear that one paycheck once sufficed, remember the supports behind that simple claim. Strong unions, cheaper homes, lower medical costs, and public investment formed the hidden scaffolding. When that scaffolding weakened, families built their own, using overtime, debt, and relentless juggling. Some still manage on one income today, usually with help, luck, or unusually low housing costs. For most, 2 paychecks are not a choice, but the admission price to ordinary life. And if we could rebuild the balance, what would you protect first? Pay, prices, or time?